Good afternoon. So, my name is Christine Doe, and I'm really pleased to welcome you to the panel discussion on assessment opportunities and challenges for, of, and with newcomer students in Nova Scotia. On the panel, we have five education professionals from 4 different organizations that support newcomer students in Nova Scotia. Okay? So from the Halifax Regional Centre for Education, or HRCE, is Lori Stafford and LeeAnn Brownell. And then from Immigration Services Association of Nova Scotia, or ISANS, is Gary Griffiths. What turn?
It's not the leave a fee.
I thought the name was a bit of a giveaway.
I never know. And then from Learn English Nova Scotia is Erin McDonald. And finally, from Nova Scotia Community College, NSCC, is Sara Devanney. Okay. So for today's panel, we're just really kind of exploring 4 questions that we have about thinking about how we support newcomers in Nova Scotia, particularly thinking about that P-12 or K-12 student population. So I'm going to ask that when panelists responds to the question that they're just going to maybe touch a little bit on their role. And I have my first question, which is, what aspects of assessment for newcomer students in Nova Scotia are going well? And this question is for 3 of them. We have Lori, Erin, and Sara. So if I can start with Lori.
So I'm speaking for HRCE, P-12. And I think going well, we have a good intake, so an initial intake assessment that we use. So when a student arrives, they are screened with an EAL assessment. We also now have a newcomer center that also does the same EAL assessment. So that initial assessment will give us an idea of their English language background. Also, we see educational background. We have a profile that we send home so that parents are able to give us information. And we also sometimes will delve into first language knowledge. So we may ask them to do a writing piece in both English, but also in first language. So that gives us information for their English language skills and sometimes first language. Once the assessment is complete, that then goes into TINET, which is within Power School in the Department of Education in Nova Scotia. And then that classroom teacher or teachers are aware of the language level of the student. So I think we're doing that really well. We're seeing where our students are when they arrive at schools. And I also think that classroom teachers, assessment-wise, are becoming more and more aware of alternative assessments. That is taking a little while because there is, especially at the upper grades, some wariness of changing an assessment and if that really is showing that they've met outcomes. But I do think assessments within classrooms are changing as well. So I would say that's going well.
Okay. So next up, Erin.
Hey there. So just to start off by saying Learn English Nova Scotia is funded by the Federal Department of Immigration, IRCC, and also the Provincial Department of Labor, Skills, and Immigration. And our primary mandate is focused on assessing using a standardized tool called the Canadian Language Benchmark Placement Test, adult newcomers. So the reason I'm here is because there is a point in which even high school students start to transition into the need for or have ways of benefiting from transition into adult programs, including the young adult program, which Gary will probably talk about. So that's my starting point. I start at age 16, and then our programs serve young adults and older adults above 16. So in terms of what's going really well, I would just echo what Lori said in terms of just a growing awareness among learners themselves about what the options are for them as they grow older and see that they're looking towards the future and trying to figure out how to finish high school and maybe what the next step is after they complete their studies. So that is really great to see, because ultimately we want the learner themselves to want to be assessed and to know why they're being assessed and so on. So that's a huge process, but I definitely feel like we often have youth now come to us who are 16 and over and ask for the assessment because they want more information about next steps, alternatives, but also support. So what supports are they eligible for? So that's really encouraging. And that growing awareness also, is because their instructors and their teachers and the people in their lives are also encouraging them. So that growing awareness is, I think, really key. And the other part that's really, really going well is the cooperation. So working closely together with HRCE, Department of Education, ISANS, NSCC to close those gaps as much as we can so that no youth or young adult goes without services that they need at critical times. So it's sort of really working closely as we can to help figure that out so that people get the right assessment at the right time. And I think those two things are really encouraging.
Okay, thank you. And next up, Sara.
My name is Sara Devanney, and I teach in the adult learning program at NSCC. I teach communications, and I'm going to echo what Erin was saying. It's been transformative for our program to have Erin doing these assessments in the high schools. In order for a student to come into our program, they have to be 18 years old, and they need to have a Canadian language benchmark score of 4.444. Once they have that, we can welcome them into our program. And it's an amazing opportunity for students who are not going to graduate from the public high school with the language that they need to be successful in the future. With our program, once they have the CLB4s, we're kind of proud of our assessment process as well. It's just a kind of ticket in to the assessment. Once they come, they need to do a math assessment and an English assessment. And from that, we're able to really get a holistic sense of who they are as a student and what their skills are. So a CLB of 4.444 or 6 doesn't tell us a lot. It just tells us a little bit. And so with our assessment, we have a personal conversation about their goals. We have a graded word list. And even in the process of looking at the words and reading them and talking about them, we get a big sense of what their language is like, their confidence. When they do the math assessment, we also see what their education level is, how their English is. They meet with our counselor so that we can get a sense of what their family situation is. Are they working? And from all of this, we then place them into either what we call our level 4, our level 3, what courses are appropriate for their language ability. And finally, I would like to say the EAL ALP program is really good. It's language plus high school diploma. So our goal is their language proficiency. That's actually our main goal. And they're getting their high school diploma at the same time. So they would do communications with me or another teacher. Basically, until they graduate, they do EAL communications. In their first year, it's 10 hours a week. They have the opportunity to do geography as an EAL geography. So they're getting the curriculum, but they're also getting language. If they want to do chemistry, we even have EAL chemistry. They have to have a certain language to be in there, but they're learning with the teacher being able to really take an EAL approach to it. And so when they graduate, we do feel like they are ready for the next program.
Okay, thank you. So my second question is for LeeAnn and Gary. And what are some missed assessment opportunities for newcomer students in Nova Scotia? So LeeAnn first.
So I would like to start off by saying that I work for the HRCE and I'm heavily involved with the Newcomer Welcome Center, but also high school EAL. So while there are a few missed opportunities for assessment, I do want to say that we have identified them and we are working closely with the EAL consultant at the province to continue to move forward. So we're not at a place where we want to be, but we've at least established a pathway that we're working on. So one of the things is an appropriate math assessment, specifically for students who have had interrupted learning. So we can do a lot of assessment in terms of their literacy piece and their knowledge in their home language, but there's often a gap around the math assessment. And I do know that the province has started working towards developing something and a tool that is specifically used at identifying early numeracy skills for students of refugee backgrounds. So the goal would be twofold. One, more accurate placement for math courses, and two, knowing where to start and how to program for students of refugee background, because it's not just about the literacy piece. The other thing is, above and beyond the EAL intake assessment or ongoing assessments, whether it be the classroom teacher or the EAL teacher, it's not just about take and do a reading assessment and have them write a piece of writing out of context of what they're doing. So it's really about building awareness for classroom teachers and even EAL teachers who are new in the role, or maybe need to kind of reflect on their practices if they've been doing it a while, is to move away from pulling kids out and stopping your programming and really looking at reading and writing outside of what they need to do in the classroom. And it's about paying attention to what strategies are they using to help them move forward in their content and language abilities. It's about, checklisting things. Are they referring to strategies? Are they referring to word walls? Are they advocating for themselves? How much are they participating with their collaborative learning? And even being aware of how can they use their home language to support the learning of new content. Sometimes it's new content. Sometimes it's just a matter of new vocabulary and making that connection. So how heavily do they rely on their home language? Are they a multilingual learner that just continues to do it for making notes on top of English, primarily English documents? Do they use subtitles on educational videos? Are listening to podcasts in their own language? And so it's just really about knowing your learner a lot more deeply than, honestly, if you take them for 20 minutes and watch them, oh, can you write about what you did on the weekend for the 10th time? Really, how valid is that? What's that really going to show you? You want to know what are their skills that help them day to day, and how are they progressing, and how do we track that? I think it's also about considering multiple ways of assessing. So I had mentioned checklists. Can they demonstrate learning orally? Can they talk about it? Oftentimes Lori and I and the EAL teachers, when we do the reading assessments, which does provide very valuable information, we do use translation as a tool. So oftentimes our students read in English, but they can't yet express what they've understood. So we do allow for translation. So they will, speak into Google Translate or maybe do a piece of writing that we hover. And they have been able to demonstrate, I understand this, I get the gist of this, but I think I'm going past my 3 minutes. But I'm not yet ready to speak in English about what I've learned. And, can they draw diagrams? Can they put things in sequence? It's about getting away from traditional pen to paper assessments. And the last thing is my final plug for when we talk about provincial assessments that happen at grade 3, 6, 8, and then the grade 10 English provincial assessment, the English one. They, in the younger grades, they're allowed access to a read aloud adaptation where text can be read aloud for them. However, and they use these tools, whether it be Immersive Reader, different extensions on their Chromebooks, they use these day to day to help them. But then things kind of shift when we get to this provincial assessments and just assessments in general. And so I know that the province and I have gone back and forth in terms of advocating for these students. Grade 10, technically, they can access this read aloud, but there are layers to it and a lot of boxes to tick and permissions to get. And it's like, what happens between 3, 6, and 8 that there's a line drawn and the 10 is different? So, but again, it's an issue that we've identified and are working for an easier solution. My apologies that I took probably way more than 3 minutes.
That was very interesting.
Sorry.
I'll keep mine to 20 seconds.
Yes, sorry. Okay. And LeeAnn, just turn your mic off. Thanks.
Yeah, hey everyone. So as mentioned, I'm a supervisor at ISANS, which is Immigration Services Association of Nova Scotia. So we're slightly different from what you do because we are a settlement organisation. So our language lessons are based around settlement language. So survival skills for the community. How can our clients communicate with a doctor's office or their children's teachers and things like that? So I think the first thing that's important is to define how we give assessments. So we use PBLA, which is portfolio-based language assessment. So how that works is at the beginning of each term, all of our clients, or I say clients, students, I'm so used to that kind of internalized language, but all of our students are given a PBLA binder. And if they want to progress to the next level, so initially they would have received a CLB placement test from LENS. So once they have that, we know where to place them. So if they say they're placed in a level 3 class, they get given a PBLA binder. And within that binder, we ask that they collect artifacts, which are essentially assessments. So if they want to progress to the next level, they need 8 assessments in reading, writing, listening, and speaking. And all of these assessments are built around real-world tasks. So we're really big with our teachers on, if this is not something that replicates something they'd have to do in their day-to-day life, it doesn't qualify as a real-world task. So for example, a reading task could be, for a young adult in our young adult program, a flyer from their school with information about a field trip somewhere. So we'd make sure they can look at that and understand it, and that would qualify as an assessment. In terms of missed opportunities within that, I really feel like when young adult immigrants come to Nova Scotia and Canada, they should all be getting a placement test from LENS, because being armed with that knowledge is so important in terms of knowing which pathway is right for them. I think we can be guilty culturally of assuming our educational framework and system is the perfect way of doing things, where we get immigrants, especially from refugee camps or maybe females from countries who have never been allowed to study. They don't have that grounding. So when we receive them in this country and we put them into a school, these guys work so hard to support them and kind of arm them with the skills they need, but we forget that all of the Canadian students, for example, have been learning these skills since they were 4 or 5 years old, and they're just layering on top of that year after year after year after year. Whereas we get immigrant youth come in and they don't have any of that grounding, and we kind of give them an assessment to do. And I'll talk about this later when we talk about challenges, but they look at that piece of paper and it's completely foreign to them, not just from a language perspective, but also from how the page is structured as well. And I think it's really important to keep that in mind, because we tend to judge them by the same standards we judge a Canadian kid, and we're failing them a bit. Even within ISANS, we are when we do that. There's a lot more scaffolding we need to do. The other area I think we're missing something would be identifying and judging a student by their academic standards rather than looking at what skills they actually have. So instead of looking at someone and saying you're not very good in this sense academically, how can we fix that? But ignoring all of their strengths, which might come from practical skills. And we really should be working out a way to look at those skills they do have, whether that's in a trade or whatever they've been doing in their home country, and leaning into that side of things instead of kind of killing their confidence by showing them they're not good within our academic frameworks.
Okay, thank you. So the third question is related to challenges. What are the key assessment challenges for newcomer students in Nova Scotia? And we have Lori, Gary, and Sara.
So when we have students come in with HRCE and you'll have to turn your mic off, Gary. So we're giving them an assessment, an initial intake EAL assessment, but we have many children who are learning English easily, but then we have many who have other challenges and not just in learning the English language. And I think it's a challenge for us is identifying those children who are at risk of language or reading disorders. So we don't really have the culturally sensitive language independent screening tests right now. So if a child is needing speech or a psych assessment, a challenge is that if they're an EAL student, there are a lot more steps to get them those resources and to get them referred than there would be for a non-EAL student. So I think that's something we really need to work towards is having equal access to all of those other resources and support systems that our other students can access more easily because we have the screening tools for our English language students. That's definitely a challenge. I think another challenge that LeeAnn had alluded to as well, for example, with provincial assessments, is we're using so many of these strategies throughout the year. And then when it comes to an assessment time, if it's not a formal adaptation, it's like the brakes are put on and you're not allowed to use that during a provincial assessment or in a high school assessment. So if they're using really good strategies, but the high school chem teacher is struggling with changing up what the assessment looks like, we're not giving them access to showing what they know. So I think there are a lot of challenges with alternative assessments and then assessing for resource and support needs such as speech and psych, and perhaps even counseling services as well. So we think we need to think of, I guess, equity in our assessments in that way.
Okay, thank you. Gary?
The first class I was given at ISANS was a literacy class, and it felt like I had to learn a completely different job because the skills you need to teach a literacy class, as I'm sure a lot of you have literacy students in your classes, it's a completely different job from teaching a normal grade 10 or grade 11 class. It's not the same. And I remember, speaking of challenges, I remember on the first assessment I gave them, and I hadn't had too much training before I started teaching with them, and it was a foundation literacy class, and I gave them a personal information form to fill out. And all week we'd scaffolded how to write their name, how to write their phone number, the letter formation of completing those answers. And I thought when Friday came around and we gave them the assessment, it would be quite and I thought I'd kind of overcoach them, to be honest. But I gave them the paper, and I remember looking around the class, and some of them were turning the piece of paper this way. Some of them were writing, they knew that they had to write their name, but they were writing it in the corner or turning it over and writing it on the back. And I realized I'd done poorly in terms of how I prepared them for it, because I assumed all they'd need to be able to do that would be to be able to write their name and their phone number. But then when I looked at the paper, I realized, how did they know that that line next to the word name represented where they were supposed to write their name? And how did I know that doing the little brackets for their area code indicated their phone number should go here? And you break apart every single assessment you give them, and you realize every single detail on that piece of paper from the age of 4 or 5, we have been getting taught how to recognize that as code for, okay, this line means I write the answer here. Whereas we get, again, kids coming in from refugee camps who've never been in school in their life, they don't have that prior knowledge. So all they see is just this piece of paper with a load of symbols and lines on it, and it doesn't make sense in their understanding of the world or their understanding of how to fill something out. So I think the big challenge we have with assessments is how can we make sure our students are familiar with the template of what an assessment looks like and how a piece of paper is structured for where they write the answers and where they look for the question and the important information. And again, the challenge for you all is if these students are part of a class with a load of children or teenagers that have come through school for years, how do you kind of take them to one side, quickly explain that, and then bring them back to the rest of the group? It's a big challenge, I think.
Okay, thank you. Sara?
I think from the perspective of NSCC and accepting students into our adult learning program is this requirement of the CLB4. What concerns us is to think of students who are going through high school and not getting to that level so that we can't take them into our program. And so the question becomes for us, why are they not getting to a CLB4 after many years sometimes in the public education system? It feels like it's a failure of them. Or sometimes we get students and they've got credits, but we can see that they don't have the language ability to have got that credit. Added to this are financial concerns. If the student has spent many years in the public system and then they come into our program and they're going to need many more years, financially that's very tough for them not to be working, not to be moving forward with their lives. One thing that happened to me a few years ago, I went with Erin actually to New Brunswick to the Language Without Borders conference. And they were presenting in New Brunswick what they do with their EAL students. And I, to be honest, I had that feeling of, I don't know if you've heard the joke, but where you're in the marathon race and you think you're in first place, but you're in last. I had that feeling because what New Brunswick was doing made such good sense. They do assessments and then they create a pathway for their students from grade 6 to grade 12. There are EAL classes for the students who are EAL learners. So they're not being put into a class that they don't have the language ability for. That is not the pathway. The pathway is they have EAL classes, and then once the student has reached a certain level through their assessment processes, then they are put into regular classes. And so I remember the diagram of the different pathways that the student might be on, and it's established from the initial assessment what the pathway is likely to be, with the understanding, I think, being, of course, the student may shift. They use the CEFR. They use something called WIDA. It's kind of the idea of it's inclusion, but it's not putting a student into a class where they're being included in the class, but they don't actually have the language ability. And I sometimes think about that with math. Like, we would not put a student in a physics class who had basic math. So why would we do that with language? Again, I don't know what the solutions are exactly, but I do feel like what I saw just briefly that New Brunswick is doing looked very thoughtful.
Okay, so I have a fourth and final question, which is for LeeAnn and Erin, and this is thinking about hope. So what do you have, what hope do you have for the future when it comes to assessment for newcomer students in Nova Scotia? And we start off with LeeAnn.
So there's a couple of things that we hope for. When we consider high school students specifically, my hope would be that a credit is given for the fact that they speak an additional language. that doesn't have a bunch of red tape around it. That would be nice. Specifically for students who haven't been to school or have had significant interrupted learning, it might be nice to give them credit for what they are coming with. The second thing, my hope would be, if this was my wish list, would also be for students who have come from interrupted learning, and I want to piggyback on what Gary said, is to give them credit for their experiences. So a lot of them come with a wealth of skill that we don't acknowledge. So, maybe by having, spending considerable time through the Welcome Center and really getting to know the student, you find out that they've laid tile with their father or their uncle. And so they know what math skills are attached to that, budgeting, communication, working with clients. Those are great skills that a lot of our students don't have that would really benefit ours, the newcomers, to give credit for that. Thinking about, someone spent a lot of time working in a bakery. Well, they can read a recipe, they can take measurements, they can do budgets for that. They have food safety skills, all of those things that we say, oh, that's cool, you worked in a bakery. Bring me a treat someday. And then that's the extent of it. It doesn't go anywhere. So I think to give credit for that, I'm not saying give them 10, but give them 1 or 2 credits might be nice encouragement for them. Being more aware of how students do use their home language to support them. And I just want to also expand a little bit on Lori's talking about our intake assessment. A new piece of that, it just rolled out, I think, 2 years ago now. We do have optional assessments. One is a science outcome, and it's all visuals. And all the students have to do is we show them the visuals, and we're just assessing, are you familiar with these concepts? So we know, do they know it, and is it just a matter of language, or do we have to do some pre-teaching around building some of that background knowledge? Another optional assessment that we have is student interest, and so really getting to know what our students are interested in. So I think my wish or my hope for the future was that those tools would be more widely used, and it's not just limited to EAL teacher use. Classroom teachers could also use that with their students as well to get to know them. So that would be one of my other hopes. I think I will leave it at that for now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And last but not least, we have Erin.
So I have 2 main hopes, but I am really, really excited about what LeeAnn just shared about just getting to know learners on a deeper level and many different aspects. That's really interesting to me, and I think that's something that applies to our adult assessment program as well. Is like the more we can know about the learner, even if it's through interpretation or through other methods, it is really valuable to getting a sense of the whole person. So first of all, the Canadian Language Benchmark Placement Test is not really for youth. It's an adult assessment. And mind you, it's not academic. It is based on settlement needs and there are no typical settlement needs, but essentially needs around settling in Canada, taking care of yourself, taking care of your family. But how we talk about that and how youth talk about that can be quite distinct and quite different. So sometimes we don't elicit enough language, I think, from the assessment to really, get a fulsome picture of their language. But having said that, it is the tool we have for figuring out what skills, some of the skills that a learner might have to bring to an adult program as they transition into youth EAL at ISANS or other programs. But the hope would be that eventually that we will have a youth-centric CLB assessment that assists with that transition period so that that they have something to share in the assessment that really adds to a fuller picture of their skills, like LeeAnn, I'm going to rename you, mentioned, is that to get a more clear picture of their skills and interests. The second hope is that I really feel hopeful about, because I feel so encouraged by all the hard work that is happening, that you're doing in the schools, that the HRCE is doing, and the department and other support networks, is that we're looking at ways to alleviate the pressure on youth themselves to make the right choice about the path they have to take. I think that none of us wants to think that a youth is sort of trying to just, figure this out in the dark. They need good information. They need coordinated response to their needs, so that when they come to HRCE, or they come to LENS or to another service agency, they get really clear, consistent information about what their options are and what's the best place for them to be right now, and what's the next best step for them. Just so that they're not having to focus on that. They can use all their energy and spirit to focus on what they want to do, which is to learn and increase their skills so that they can move forward. So the stronger we are as a network and helping each other to improve the pathways that we've laid out, or that we want to have illuminated, I think the better off youth will be.
Okay, so that is going to bring us to an end for today's panel discussion. And I just want to say thank you so much to our panelists for just coming here today to share their wealth of knowledge that they have. So this is why we do need these events, because there is so much going on, to help support newcomers in Nova Scotia. And it will be interesting to see how this conversation evolves. So I just want to say thank you.